Good morning, friends. And this morning I would like to bring you a developing story out of the city located in southern, what is still Ukraine. The city is Melitopol, not to be confused with Mariupol. Um, Mariupol is the one that had been defended by the Azov Battalion and Ukrainian Armed Forces regiments. That city was under siege for a long time. Eventually, all of the defenders were corralled in a large industrial park called Azovstal, where after resisting for a couple of weeks, they surrendered. Unlike Mariupol, Melitopol was captured, or I prefer to say liberated, very early on in the war. It was surrendered by the Ukrainian armed forces without fighting. And so, for the most part, the city is untouched, it's not destroyed. Um, and people have been trying to live normal lives there for pretty much the last 3 months. They were trying to live normal lives until this morning when an explosion rocked the city, as the New York Times article reports. May 30th, 2022. Hello, friends. Before I go on, please click a like button. Please subscribe to this channel and help it grow. Here's the story by the New York Times. An explosion in a Russian occupied city of Melitopol appears to target a pro Kremlin leader. An explosion rocked the Russian occupied city of Melitopol early on Monday, sending plumes of smoke into the sky just outside the offices of the pro Kremlin head of the region, according to Ukrainian and Russian officials. Now, as far as I know, Russian officials are not saying that the target of explosion was this, what the New York Times calls a pro Kremlin leader. Russian news sources are reporting this as a terrorist act, not directed at any particular individual. However, the Ukrainian sources are reporting it as an attack on this pro Kremlin leader, the individual that the New York Times article goes on to name as, let's see, where is it? Yevgeny Belinsky. Mm-hmm. And Ukrainian sources, Ukrainian media, use that name, Yevgeny Belinsky, and say that he's the target of the attack. In fact, they go farther than that. Not the media, but the Ukrainian government. The Ukrainian government more or less takes responsibility for this act of terror by claiming that the target of the attack was Yevgeny Belinsky, who, by the way, was not hurt by this explosion, and he was probably nowhere near this explosion when it took place. As the result of the explosion, 3 people were sent to the hospital with injuries, and a car was destroyed. The New York Times claims that the explosion took place in front of the offices of this Yevgeny Belinsky. However, that is just not true. The closest office to this explosion was a travel office, and across the street was a hotel. The explosion was meant to attack vehicles which were driving along the road to a government building, right? And they did that. According to Russian news sources, it was a remotely detonated charge, right? So an IED with a remote detonator, and it attacked a vehicle, right? It set off when a vehicle was driving by it, and the people inside were hurt. Fortunately, they were not killed. Now, why does the New York Times claim that the target of this attack was Yevgeny Belinsky? Probably because they're just repeating what the Ukrainian news sources are saying and what this Ukrainian advisor to the head of Ukraine's Minister of Internal Affairs, which is an FBI analog. So this advisor to the minister, his name is Anatoly Gerashchenko, and he is the one who made an official statement saying that the target of the attack was Yevgeny Belinsky. Here's the kicker. The only reason he is saying this is because the Ukrainian media is reporting that the explosion happened next to the Belinsky building, right? The Belinsky building in question is a 9-story building. It's not an office building. It's a 9-story building where people live. It's a residential building. It's called the Belinsky building because some years ago, Yevgeny Belinsky apparently either financed it or helped build it in some other way. And ever since that, the building was referred to as Belinsky building. This is very well known to the residents of Melitopol. However, to the outsiders, when they hear a name Belinsky building, they think it's somehow connected to this guy. Maybe it's his residence or his office. And this is where the mistake happens. Now, I'm not the one who is discovering this, right? I want to give full credit to Anatoly Shary, who is a fantastic Ukrainian blogger who is now residing in Spain, and he's considered to be enemy of state by the Ukrainian government. They want him so bad that they're trying to extradite him from Spain. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, Anatoly was picked up by the Spanish law enforcement agency in connection to this extradition request. He was, of course, released. I'm not sure what's going on with his with this extradition process, but let me assure you that if he were ever allowed to be extradited to Ukraine, he would face some serious charges, and more than likely he would be simply disappeared like so many other journalists were. Because we're not dealing with a government that does things by the books. We're dealing with a junta government. That's Zelensky government. They're a junta government. And so I want to get back to the meat of the story, which is this idea that the Ukrainian government now supporting terrorists. The New York Times is writing farther down that the former mayor of Melitopol said that whoever was responsible for the blast, the attack underscored the level of local opposition that Russians would continue to face. So Mr. Fedorov is calling an act of terrorism. He just calls it local opposition, and goes on to say, the article quotes him as, "The ground will burn in Melitopol," he said, "until Russians leave the city." The article then goes on to say, the attack comes as the Ukrainian military is engaged in a counteroffensive to reclaim territory in the neighboring regions of Kherson. I'd just like to add that no such efforts are being made. Earlier in a month, a couple of attempts were made by the Ukrainian armed forces to break through to Kherson, which is also Russian Federation controlled. However, they were repulsed with huge losses to the Ukrainian armed forces. It was a disaster for them. Article, the New York Times article goes on to say a lot of lies, like there are no precise estimates of the population remaining in Russian-controlled territory. The article cites Ukrainian officials who estimate, so Ukrainian officials who are proven liars, okay, estimate that only half of the region's residents remain in Russian Federation controlled territories. So liars estimate that half of the population remains. Okay? The article goes on. Sergei Kuzan, head of the Ukrainian Center for Security and Cooperation, which specializes in military analysis, told Radio Liberty on Friday that the resistance movement, I'm going to pause here, this is not the New York Times saying it now, this is me saying it, terrorists, continuing with the article, in the occupied territories had grown, and while largely autonomous, was supported by the state. So here we go. The head of the Ukrainian Center for Security and Cooperation, which is a think tank, is saying that Ukrainian state supports terrorism. Now, why is this terrorism instead of, let's say, resistance, right, or insurgency? It's terrorism because it's targeting civilian targets, as exemplified by this explosion. There were no military targets anywhere near this explosion. This explosion didn't happen anywhere near an office building where there are government officials, right? You can't even make the claim. Well, the New York Times tries it. New York Times tries to make the claim that this explosion happened next to a government building, right? It has to make that claim in order to call it an insurgency. But it didn't happen next to a government building. It happened next to a travel agency alongside of a road. The road leads to a government building, okay? But it's not next to the government building. It's not near a government building. The bomb went off targeting civilians who might have been traveling to the said government building, located some blocks away. It's an act of terror. And the Ukrainian government supports terrorism against Ukrainians, right? As far as the Ukrainian government is concerned, people living in Melitopol are still Ukrainians. Pretty much all the official heads of the Ukrainian government continuously talk about how they want to liberate Melitopol, right? They want it back. They want all of the territories they lost since the start of the special military operation. They want those territories back. They want their people back. But while they're saying these things, they're supporting terrorist acts against their own population, which is nothing new. They have been doing terrorism against their own population since 2014. And this is the Ukrainian government terrorizing its own population since 2014. That's all I have for today. Please like and subscribe to the channel. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.